Hi. All right. Welcome to Chapter 6 of The Oath by Frank Peretti. Okay. We have now experienced that there's been another death. And the speculation that this second victim was in relationship to the first victim was just the same as substantiated by her own mouth. Maggie Bly, the town owner's wife, was seen and heard walking and singing her heart's content. She was no longer scared. Now remember, at the start of chapter 4, or the start of chapter 5, Maggie was freaking out. But by the end of chapter 5, she was merry, just so happy, lighthearted. And she's seen going toward Old Town. Now, at the very start of the book, you read about Old Town. And Levi Cobb follows Maggie, but it's too late. Let's read on. Chapter 6, The Oath. Oh, and warning, there may be some violence, there may be some language. Good thing is, though, the writer of this book is a Christian, so he kept it toned. Anyway, just the disclaimer, parental and just good advice. Richard Kidd, maybe. I read it to my son. But his middle name stands for dragon. But don't worry, his first name stands for warrior. Tells me he's going to be slaying some dragons one day. And I believe it. There were 6 of us all together, myself and 4 men whom I will not name. And then there was James Hyde and his son-in-law, Harrison Bly. I don't know what Nelson Parmenter said or to whom he said it, but James made it clear that we'd better follow his orders or we would end up the same way. We lashed Nelson to the old rock crusher in front of Hyde Hall, and then we took turns beating him until he was unconscious. An old rock crusher in front of Hyde Hall. Present day, there's no rock crusher. James said to leave him there all night, so we did, and when morning came, Nelson was gone. I don't know where. Folks are saying a bear killed him while he was out hunting, but they don't know what happened the night before he disappeared. They don't know what James and Harrison made us do. From an anonymous note found in a wall safe of the Sorensen residence, West Fork, during demolition in 1948, and donated to the West Fork Historical Society. Chapter 6, The Oath. Steve heard a knock on his motel room door at 9 the next morning, a knock he wasn't expecting and wasn't ready for. He'd had a sleepless night, he'd just gotten out of bed, and the place was a mess. Maybe it was Tracy Ellis. He opened the door. It was another sheriff. It was the sheriff. The small nameplate above his badge read Lester Collins. Dr. Benson? Steve was embarrassed. He hadn't shaved yet. His eyes felt swollen. Had he even combed his hair? Yes, Sheriff Collins? That's right, he said, extending his hand. Come on in. Great first impression, Steve thought. Sorry about the state of things in here. I had a long day yesterday and I'm just barely getting started on this one. I understand. Things have been pretty hectic for me too. We're short of manpower and I've been running in all directions trying to keep up. I would have met with you sooner if I could have, believe me. Steve moved his camouflage gear off the only available chair. Please have a seat. Collins took the chair. Steve sat on the bed. We've appreciated your help, said Collins, casting an admiring look at Steve's .30-06, leaning in the corner. He nodded at the rifle. Is that what you used on 318? That's right. How has it been working with Deputy Alice? Confusing, overwhelming, and frustrating, Steve thought, but he knew it wasn't really Tracy Ellis's fault. We've done all right, as well as we've been able to anyway. There are a lot of stones unturned as yet. Well, then you'll be interested in the news. Sir? That's one of the reasons I'm here. He smiled as if conveying good news. I think the final stone has just been turned. Steve was genuinely eager to hear about that. Oh, really? I met with the coroner and Deputy Ellis this morning, and the evidence has finally come together to our satisfaction. It was that grizzly you shot 318. We're sure of it. Oh, you are now. Steve was in a quandary. How could he question what the sheriff was saying without implying the sheriff didn't know what he was saying? Did you get some new information? Well, final conclusions. From the autopsy of your brother's body and the autopsy of the bear, we've been able to match things up. The autopsy of the bear? You mean a subsequent autopsy? Collins lost momentum at that question. Well, the autopsy. Sheriff, I performed that autopsy and I didn't find anything to establish that 318 was the attacking bear. As a matter of fact, I was planning on revisiting the site of the killing today, hoping to find something I may have missed. Well, now you don't have to. Steve didn't want to argue. He didn't want to be obstinate. But this was happening just a little too fast. I'm sorry, sir, but I think I'm missing something here. Are you saying that Deputy Ellis concurred with this? Of course. The coroner based his conclusion on the pathology report and reaccepted that conclusion. The pathology report. Yes, on paper, the pathologist said Cliff had died from a bear attack, but in person, when grilled by Marcus Dufresne, the pathologist had been uncertain about what had caused Cliff's death. And Tracy Ellis? Her change of mind almost smelled political. If she'd agreed to the bear theory at all, she must have been dragged kicking and screaming. Collins pressed ahead. Anyway, I wanted you to know right away. I knew it would be a load off your mind. Uh-huh. Thanks a lot, Sheriff. You're really a big help. And what about Marcus Dufresne? Who? Marcus Dufresne, the game warden. He helped me shoot 318 and do the autopsy. Did he have something to add that I don't know about? That could be. Don't you know, Collins? You didn't talk to him yourself? No, but I'm sure Deputy Ellis did. Uh-huh. Steve was not at a loss for words at this moment, only words he could use. You seem uncomfortable. Well, choose your words carefully, Steve. Of course, you had no real obligation to consult me before reaching your conclusion. Did you have another conclusion? The question was almost a dare. Steve had his doubts and concerns, of course. Why else couldn't he sleep last night? But he only admitted, no, not yet. Collins smiled to keep things pleasant. Well, look at it this way. We could put this whole thing behind us now. You could get back to your work at the university, just get on with your life. And most of all, your sister-in-law, Evelyn, can get on with hers. It's over. She's free to go her way and rebuild. She was free now? Steve didn't mean to be offended, but he was. So you're saying she's no longer a suspect? That made Collins edgy. Right. She never was a serious suspect to begin with. It was just that we had to consider all possibilities. But now that you've closed the case, you say she's free to go. Collins looked at Steve through half-squinted eyes. Unless you have good reason for us to reopen the case, yes. Pow! The soft drink can, already riddled with bullet holes, took one more bullet and flipped off the top of the log to join several others in the gravel, all bent, twisted, and ventilated. Pow! Another can went sailing, then another, then another. Tracy stood near her patrol car in the middle of an old gravel pit outside Rest Fork, the favorite spot of the valley's shooters and plinkers. The policy was pack it in, shoot it up, pack it out. But still the signs were everywhere. Fragments of soft drink cans and plastic jugs, bullet-riddled boxes, spent shells. Tracy had come with a grocery bag full of empty cans set aside for moments like this. She had awakened that morning expecting a full day, but after this morning's meeting, it seemed she would have time to vent some steam. And after this morning's meeting, she had plenty of steam to vent. She was just reloading her .38 from a box of cartridges on the hood of her car when she spotted Steve's big camper lumbering down the gravel road into the pit. This guy was a hunter. He'd found her, and it hadn't taken him long. Now she'd have to talk to him, and she wasn't looking forward to it. To gain some time, she went to set up more cans. Steve rolled to a stop by the patrol car and watched her take position and put on air protectors. She had to know he was there, but she was plainly ignoring him. He swung the door open, hopped down from the cab, and then paused as she opened up a revolver and another 6 cans, one per shot, went flying. He almost forgot his anger. She was good. Tracy lowered the gun, removed the ear protectors, and finally turned her head to look at Steve. She must have discerned his mood. Want to shoot a few cans? He hadn't given it a thought before this, but as a matter of fact, he did. It could help. Without a word, he walked to the log to set up 6 more targets. She went to the hood of her car to reload. When he returned, she had the gun and air protectors ready. Pretend they killed your brother, she said. Within 6 seconds, every can had flipped and tumbled to the ground. He handed her the gun, removed the ear protectors, and waited for her to speak. She went to reload. So you've heard from Sheriff Collins. He turned to face her directly. I want to know if you agree with him. She flipped the cylinder open and let the shells fall into her hand. Why do you think I'm out here killing cans? So explain this to me. I don't. Maggie Bly is dead. What? He stared at her, disbelieving. She slipped the reloaded gun into her holster. She went back to Hyde River last night and somebody killed her. We found her shoulder bag and one shoe near the river and some of her blood, but no body so far. No body? How do you know she's dead? Trust me, she's dead and she'll never be found. Just like, pardon me, the upper half of your brother's body. Steve joined Tracy by the car just so he could lean against it. I suppose this has something to do with the weird backward ways of those people up there. They they have their own ways of settling things. Then Collins lied to me. No, he believes what he wants to believe, and he wants to believe a grizzly killed your brother. So what does he think killed Maggie? Tracy only chuckled and shook her head. I got Collins to drive up to Hyde River last night to help me investigate. We questioned Levi Cobb because he had arrived at the scene of the crime just before I did. But all we got was another sermon about sin and repenting. We finally ascertained that he didn't actually see what happened. We talked to Harold Bly. Well, Sheriff Collins did. And they discussed hunting and fishing. Then Les brought up Maggie, just brought her up casually and asked him where Maggie was. And Harold said that they'd had a disagreement and she left him and gone to her mother's. But they were still in touch, and Les said he was sorry to hear about the disagreement, and then we left. That was it? Steve asked, his tone incredulous. Steve, there are no witnesses and no body. Levi says he heard Maggie, but he never saw her. So if Harold Bly says Maggie is still alive, it must be true. Her sarcasm was obvious. Case closed. Well, what if it is true? Then nothing happened to Maggie. And if nothing happened to Maggie, then we don't have to suspect any conspiracy to commit murder. And we could fall back on the grizzly idea to explain your brother's death. Simple, easy, just the way Les Collins likes it. Once the coroner said it was a bear attack, Collins wouldn't hear another word. But why? It's the whole Hyde Valley thing. Harold Bly, the fears, the superstitions, all of it. Steve crossed his arms. And of course, you're finally going to explain all that to me. I don't suppose there's any chance you'll just leave the valley, help Evelyn get started again, and just drop this whole thing? He shook his head. You should have met my brother when he was alive. She nodded with understanding. Just thought I'd ask. Now she drew a breath, whistled it out slowly, and tried to think of where to start. This is going to sound so crazy. It's sounding that way already, so go ahead. Les Collins grew up in Hyde River. He's really a part of that culture. He's got a lot of that town in his blood, okay? So there's a political connection of sorts. Well, yeah, right. And those people helped elect him. He has strong ties with them, and he respects the... Tracy stopped and took a deep breath before saying, well, we call it the oath. The oath? Tracy looked heavenward, still groping. It's let's see. Okay, now you remember I told you there were superstitions and traditions up there. Uh-huh. Well, I don't know exactly how this one started, but somewhere back in the town's history, a bunch of the townspeople took an oath of secrecy, a pledge that they wouldn't reveal town secrets to outsiders. And that's still a town tradition. Needless to say, it makes police work difficult. We can't get witnesses, we can't get information, nobody will inform on anybody else, and there are a couple reasons for that. One, if you blab something you're not supposed to, well, remember what almost happened in the tavern? People have been clobbered for saying too much. Not that we in the sheriff's department ever hear about it, mind you. The other reason is, she hesitated, then laughed nervously. Well, you remember Maggie saying that your brother got eaten, eaten up? Of course. I thought she meant the bear. Tracy shook her head. That wasn't what she was talking about. There's a superstition that goes back as far as the secret oath. I mean, clear back to the founding of the town. There are folks up there in the valley who believe. She hesitated, then gave a nervous laugh. That there's a big dragon lurking up in the woods, a dragon that eats people. She looked at Steve and saw the reaction she expected, a look of total incredulity. She pressed on. Hey, you heard Levi and Maggie talking about it. You saw how they really believed what they were saying. To a lot of the Hyde River folks, the dragon's real. They really believe it's out there. Steve rinsed at the absurdity of it. How? How can they believe such a thing? You're an outsider, Steve. Remember that. It's hard to understand how powerful a tradition can be if you never grew up here. I don't know how to describe it. The Irish have their leprechauns, the Scots have the Loch Ness monster. Every kid grows up with the boogeyman in his closet. Listen, I could still remember my grandmother telling me that if I wasn't a good girl, the dragon was going to come and eat me. And yeah, I believed it. You get the idea pounded into your head right along with Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. But usually we outgrow things like that. Santa Claus, yes. The Tooth Fairy, yes. The dragon, no way. But has anyone ever seen it? Steve posed the question only to point out its obvious answer. Well, even if they did, they wouldn't talk about it. There are the old tales, though, about people seeing it. Steve smiled wryly. Sure, there were also people who had seen UFOs, Sasquatches, ghosts, and the Virgin Mary in the clouds, mainly because they wanted to. Well, that doesn't prove much. I know, Tracy said, but there's more to this belief, and it affects your brother's death. I'm listening. Okay, let's say I'm Harold Bly, owner and president of the Hyde Mining Company, the company that built that town from the beginning. Now, Harold's not much of anything when you measure him against the high rollers of the outside world. But in Hyde Valley, with his land holdings and money in his family line, plus his power to provide or deny jobs, he is numero uno. Like you said, the godfather of Hyde Valley? Right. So suppose I'm Harold Bly. I find out my wife is having an affair with some outsider, and I want to carry out vengeance. Carry out vengeance. Of course, I'd want to cover it up, make it look like something else caused it. You're not serious. She knew this was going to be tough to explain. You should try being a cop in this valley. Some things go beyond reason. You're actually suggesting that someone cut up my brother? Steve, I'm only saying that if that is what happened, the perpetrators would have had an automatic cover up. The Hyde River people have an oath, especially when it comes to the dragon. And if they had any notion the dragon was responsible, you can be sure they'd never say a thing about it. They'd deny the whole thing. People are afraid up there. They're afraid of each other. And a lot of them are afraid of the dragon. And let me tell you something else. The myth isn't fading with time. If anything, the dragon is bigger now and more hungry. And people are more scared than ever. I don't know why that's happening, but I notice it every time I go up there. You got only a small taste of it in the tavern. Steve recalled it. That friend of Doug's said it was something they just don't talk about, and he just about got killed for saying that much. And there you are. Then she added pointedly, and Sheriff Collins knows all this. He knows the rules. So lately, it's gotten tough and kind of weird. Sometimes, if we even hear about it, that is, Something shady will happen and we won't be able to find any witnesses or evidence to build a case. And we'll end up saying, well, the dragon must have done it. Meaning the case is probably unsolvable and the dragon is being blamed for it. You heard Maggie and Levi. As far as they're concerned, the dragon ate your brother. Forget human perpetrators. But wait a minute. You have evidence. You have my brother's body. Tracy brought her hands together with a clap. Now we're up to the present, and you can see why I'm out here blasting away at cans. Her voice rose with excitement. This is the first time an outsider has crossed somebody in that valley and gotten killed, and we actually have a body left over. It's the biggest lead we've ever had, and it is definitely worth pursuing. Then she added with exasperation, but I am not the sheriff of Clark County. I am not bound up in politics and keeping everybody happy and getting reelected. With that, she drew her gun and indulged in one more shot, sending the can skittering across the gravel. She smiled in satisfaction, then said, so if you ask me, Maggie was two-timing her husband. Her husband probably had her killed, and he had it staged so people would think it was the dragon. That will be the end of it. I can assure you, Maggie Blythe's body will never be found. She's gone. And if anybody wants to know what happened to her, Harold Blythe will tell you she left him and ran off. There are plenty of folks up there, though, who will positively believe the dragon ate her. Trust me, I grew up there. Steve's mouth was dry, and in Cliff's case, that's what it looked like. Tracy saw the tremor that passed through Steve's body. Her voice was quiet as she said, it's pretty horrible, but that is what it looked like, that someone left half a body to get the rumor started, to get people thinking about the dragon. Then somehow they did away with Maggie's body altogether. There was no need to leave part of a body. Then the word gets around the town that people are terrified, and now I'll guarantee you they are not going to talk to anyone. I could be wrong, but I think there's a cloud of fear and superstition up there that some very ruthless people are hiding behind. Harold Blythe. Well, she shook her head. What can we prove? All I know is Harold's a direct descendant of the original Hyde Valley, of the Hyde family. And somehow this dragon thing is connected with his family. And I think he could be using that fact to scare people, to let them think he has some special connection with the dragon. All around that town, Harold Blythe's the one to know, the one to please. And whatever you do, you don't cross him and you don't talk to outsiders. So why does Levi talk about the dragon? Tracy rolled her eyes. It's his mission in life. He's superstitious just like the others, but some years ago he got super saved, if you know what I mean. Now the dragon's a religious thing. He sees a message in it. And apparently he's not afraid. Well, for one thing, everyone thinks he's crazy, so they stay away from him. He survives because he has no credibility, and also because he could break every bone in your body if he had to. Steve smiled at that remark. Tracy shrugged and sighed away her exasperation. But anyway, here I am with my hunches and theories and not a whole lot I can do about them. You saw what happened to your brother. You saw how terrified Maggie was. This isn't something a few underpaid, low-budget backwoods cops want to mess with. Not when it's easier to just get along, let things slide. I'm sure Collins is hoping you'll just go your way, content with the bear theory, content in knowing your sister-in-law is free of suspicion. Then she added, and that is true, you know. Evelyn is not a suspect. She never should have been under suspicion, Steve said vehemently. Tracy didn't want to rehash her reasons for questioning Evelyn. Well, she's off the list, so you can walk away from this whole thing if you want to. They stood there in silence, just leaning on the car and looking at the bullet-riddled cans. I don't know if I can do that, Steve said finally. You can do it, Steve, and that's what makes me envy you. Remember, you don't have to live with these people. You don't have to hold down a job as a cop in Hyde Valley where no one will cooperate with you if there's a serious crime. You don't have to try to sleep at night wondering who's out there doing this sort of thing and how they might feel about you. You can get out. Somebody murdered my brother, and I think you're telling me that person will go free. Have you told Evelyn about all this? He paused, then said softly, No. Why not? He didn't have to answer before she said, Let me guess, if you tell her Cliff was murdered, she'll want to know why, and she doesn't know about the affair, right? I feel like I'm going to sneeze, y'all. Steve nodded. And I only want her to get better, to recover her senses. I don't know what finding out about Cliff and Maggie would do to her. I understand, Tracy said softly. I guess you have to decide whether it's better for Evelyn to think her husband was killed by a bear or possibly murdered by a jealous husband. He couldn't decide. Not yet. I guess all I'm saying is you can walk away, Steve. You can put it all behind you. I envy that. She took the box of cartridges off the hood of the car. I've got to get going. I've given you enough to think about. Don't know what else you'll do here without a bear to hunt, but you can let me know. She opened the trunk and put the cartridges away. But Steve, one more thing. She waited until he looked her way, and she had his full attention. I can't tell you what to do, but just for the record, my duty is to the law and the people of this valley. I know you have some heavy issues to resolve, but please don't make trouble. And don't break the law. If you break the law, I'll have to do my job. Remember that. Levi had the garage doors open to let in the sunlight. The phone company truck was about finished, but Levi was still waiting on new rear springs, so it sat patiently on the right side of the garage. Its rear axle dropped out. Right now, the county's backhoe needed the hydraulic pump looked at. The boom and bucket were sluggish, the operator had told him. Yeah, sluggish for the county has to be real sluggish, Levi told the backhoe, pulling his tool chest closer and searching through a drawer for the right wrench. So we'll check your hose fittings and make sure they're cinched up. He rolled under the machine on his garage creeper, seeking out the hydraulic pump. You get those hydraulic lines sucking there, you get downright rimpy, am I right? Now hold still, this ain't gonna hurt a bit. Cobb! Ah, company, Levi muttered to the hydraulic pump. He was expecting visitors today. A little red nose there. I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to be rude. Okay, so he was expecting visitors today. They hadn't announced they'd be coming, but he was expecting them anyway. He rolled out from under the backhoe slowly, careful not to bang his head. There stood Vic Moore, the contractor, with three of his buddies. One was Phil Garrett, currently in Vic Moore's employ and looking downright bizarre with a bandage covering most of his head. He'd nearly lost his ear in a barroom brawl, but Levi knew it wasn't wise to mention it. The second was Andy Schuyler, an unemployed miner and regular fixture around the pool table at Charlie's. The third was Carl Ingfeldt, a wiry little cuss who had an irritating way of hanging around like a black fly, just looking for morsels of information to take back to Harold Bly. If you would just excuse me a moment. One thing for sure, this isn't like I'm going on to a book reading club where they're all on a bridge and everything. I don't know how in the world they're able to do it without taking a break. It's probably edited. Good morning, gentlemen, Levi said, getting to his feet. Vic Moore stepped forward, his thumbs tucked in his pants and his fingers around his belt. Levi noticed that he smelled bad. We hear you've been talking to the police. Levi nodded. Yeah, Tracy Ellis, about my license tags. Vic looked at his three backup men, and they exchanged knowing sneers. Vic turned back to Levi. You lying son of a... Levi appeared relaxed, leaning against the backhoe, but he had drawn a hunting knife from a sheath on his hip and now held it casually, checking the edge with his thumb. I guess you're wondering about Maggie. Ain't that right, Carl? Carl tried to look cool and undaunted, but he nodded. We want to know why you're prying into Harold and Maggie's personal business, Vic said. Levi looked at them quizzically. If we're talking about Harold's business, why is it Harold here? We're his friends, but not Maggie's. You turned her away, Vic. Vic didn't answer. He was staring at Levi's knife. I've used it before, Levi answered, seeing the question in Vic's eyes, but only 'cause I had to. He got a piece of me, but I got a bigger piece of him. Took his nose off. Phil leaned forward. I didn't say ear. Phil glowered at him. Anyway, let's clear the air, gentlemen, so we can all get back to work. Maggie needed a place to stay, and I put her up. Tracy Ellis came looking for her because of what happened to that photographer. Vic bristled at that. And you talked to her. Levi looked puzzled. She's Tracy Ellis, Vic. She grew up here. She knows about all this stuff. She's a cop, Vic countered. She's working for outside people. She's working for the law. So what did you tell her? Carl demanded. Levi shrugged. Gave her my opinion. Told her I thought the dragon got him. That seemed to be the only word that offended these guys. Andy shoved his way toward the front. Why, you... Levi gestured with the knife as Vic held Andy back. Now, come on, just take a long look at how it'll go. You know Tracy and how she feels about my opinions? You know Collins, too, and where he stands. Soon as you bring in the dragon, he pulls out. And that's what happened. I got a call from him this morning, and he wanted to be sure I got the word. They decided Grizz got the photographer, and Maggie's just taken off, and Harold's in the right, as always. And I should just go about my business and forget about the whole thing. As for that professor, I understand he's packing up and leaving, so that's that. Sure, I took a little chance, but now the cops aren't asking any more questions. The professor's gone and everything's over. Nice and smooth. The men looked at one another as if deciding whether or not they agreed with Levi's actions. As for the widow, Levi continued in an even tone, she's out of this thing. Maybe she'll learn what her husband was doing, and maybe not. But at least she could go home and get on with her life. Vic asked. So what if the cops come back? Levi couldn't believe he'd heard such a question. Vic, have they ever come back? Vic and his buddies visibly relaxed. Vic turned toward the door, then turned back as if needing to get in the last word. Cobb, someday you're going to say too much. You watch yourself. Nice talking to you, said Levi. Just once, I'd like one straight answer to a question. I'd like, Steve caught himself ranting out loud and stopped. He was getting as bad as Levi. He threw down his notebook and slumped in the chair by the table in his motel room. Should he just pack up, leave, and drop the whole matter? If he did, the death of his brother and its true cause would haunt him forever. Should he stay and investigate further? Where? What? Who could he talk to? Who would talk to him? The police were no longer with him, and the local folks had been against him from the start. And what about Evelyn? What could he tell her, and what point would there be in doing so? He couldn't prove Cliff was killed by a bear, but he couldn't prove otherwise. So why cast doubt on the bear theory and raise all the other questions that would only hurt her? If it wasn't a bear, then Cliff was murdered. If Cliff was murdered, then there had to be a reason. The affair. But with Maggie gone, and actually he didn't know if she was dead or alive, there was no way to prove the affair had ever happened. So why tell Evelyn when so little could be established anyway? And what about Evelyn's memory? That might still return. And then the phone rang. This was either going to be the key to it all or more confusion, he thought. He grabbed up the phone beside the bed. Hello? Steve? Dan Kramer. Steve sat on the bed. Dan Kramer was a biochemist at the university. At the sound of Dan's voice, Steve remembered the saliva sample taken from Steve's body and all the tangle of other information and events he'd forgotten about it. Dan, hi. What's up? Well, I don't know. Dan had a hint of laughter in his voice as if he had just been the victim of a practical joke. FedEx just delivered your saliva sample and I've run some tests on it. Yeah, Steve said, trying to hold back his impatience. Come on, Dan, just tell me. Well, first of all, we ran the electrophoresis, and it wasn't bear saliva, and it wasn't human. As a matter of fact, the bands we got ruled out any kind of mammal. No mammal, I know how it's pronounced, but I can't get it out. No mammal, I'll just say it like that. No mammal indications at all. Mammalian. No, the DNA rules that out. Great, more non-information. Well, is it saliva? Oh, it's saliva, all right, but you're in the wrong part of the country to be sending in samples like this. Look at the amino acids and the enzymes. I'd say you've got a reptile. Steve's mind came to an abrupt halt, as if hitting a wall. What? It's a common pattern for large lizards. The closest match would be, black tagoo, Savannah monitor, something along that line. There was a protracted silence. Steve? Dan, this was my brother. I really hope this isn't a joke. Dan was firm. Steve, this is no joke. I'm giving it to you straight. You're sure? You didn't get the samples mixed up or anything? No, I gave this one priority. Can you fax your report to me? What's the number? Steve realized as soon as he said it that he had no number. He didn't even know where he might find a fax machine. I don't know what I was thinking. I doubt if they've ever seen a fax machine in this town. What's the address? Steve ran a hand through his hair. This was exasperating. My sister-in-law is getting out of the hospital today. I was thinking of checking out this place. Well, if you're through up there, you could just see the report when you get back. Steve made an instant decision. I realize I'm not through up here yet. I might stay a little longer. Listen, as soon as I know for sure what I'm doing and where I'll be, I'll call you. Reptile? Large lizard? I may be here a while. If Charlie Mack was moving up in the world, he sure didn't feel like it. Sure, he was getting help from some of his patrons, the ones who didn't mind working, and Harold Bly had sent some men over. They had cut a nice-sized doorway through the wall between the tavern and the mercantile, but he had really hoped Harold would help supervise the operation. Charlie was finding it almost impossible to run one business while renovating the other. He was constantly running back and forth through that doorway to keep things moving, and his feet were starting to hurt. His patience was growing short, and "Hey!" he shouted to two men on ladders. "Where are you going with that?" They were trying to lower an old Indian canoe from the ceiling of the mercantile, but had underestimated its weight. "Not far, Charlie." "Well, just leave it there. Leave it there. Thanks." "Let's get going on the floor, guys. We have to scrub the whole thing so we can paint it." "Where's the mops?" "Back of the tavern." "Where?" he yelled. "Ask Melinda." Oh, well. Sure, it was busy, hectic, about to drive him crazy, but someday it would all be worth it. Someday this place would be rolling right along, doing business like it used to do before Ebo Denning bought it. Someday Charlie would be able to pay Harold back, and it would be all his. If he lived long enough. He went behind the old oak counter and pretended to tinker with the cash register, a new digital machine he didn't even know how to operate. The thing came with instructions, but he hadn't read them. He couldn't keep his mind on it. His hand went to his chest and he rubbed a burning itch over his heart. It was worse today. When it had first shown up a week ago, he thought it must be heartburn. But it wouldn't go away, not even with Alka-Seltzer. It had to be nerves. Sure, that's what it was, with all the stress in the book work and the inventory. Nerves. Stress. Hives, maybe. Or maybe it was Harold. Harold had connections. He had heard Harold could make things like this happen. What if Harold's trying to muscle me out? He buys into the business that gets rid of his partner and everything becomes his, just like the rest of this town. Well, Charlie had dreams, ambitions, and they did not necessarily include Harold Bly. Harold had his empire already. Charlie wanted one of his own, even if it was a little one. He deserved it. Charlie struck the counter with his fist. I deserve it, he thought. I deserved it when Sam Calig had this place before he sold it to Ebo. Sam selling a store to Ebo Denning 5 years ago had erased Sam Cali from Charlie's list of friends, and it was only Ebo's leaving that finally made things right. Sure, Ebo had taken good care of the place. The mercantile was well stocked and well organized when Charlie bought it, with all the dry goods neatly arranged on shelves and the aisles clearly designated according to contents. But as far as Charlie was concerned, it was still Ebo's mercantile. It still bore his personality, his style. And Charlie couldn't stand having the slightest reminder of that black man around. So the old photographs of miners, loggers, and pioneer families had to come down from the walls only because Ebo had hung them there. The huge ripsaw came down from the ceiling so a moral could be painted on it, and it could be rehung as something new and improved and not Ebo's ripsaw. The antique tools hanging all around the ceiling, all the old hammers, saws, and plows, the wringer washer, the bunghole bore, and the blacksmith's tools could stay since they belonged to the original settlers of the town, and the townsfolk would miss them. But Charlie rearranged them his way. They could not remain where Ebo had them. The Indian canoe would be a problem, but he'd deal with that later. Ebo's old cash register was gone, and good riddance. Charlie! It was Doug, dropping by for a look-see and carrying a cold bottle of beer. Oh, hi, Doug. What do you think? Looking good, Charlie, Doug said, clearly impressed. I mean, like it's gonna look good. What are you up to these days? Running the skidder for Harold. We're logging off that 40 acres above Black Rock. Charlie nodded approvingly. Great to be working, I'll bet. You know it. There was a pause. Charlie tried to sound disinterested as he asked offhandedly, so whatever became of that bear thing? Doug smiled a little. Talked to Vic Moore this morning. It's over. Sheriff settled on the bear, the grizzly they shot. So we were right. The cops are out of it, and that rimpy prof who thinks he's a hunter is packing it up and leaving. Charlie forced a smile and leaned on the cash register. He's gone, eh? Yeah, and it's a good thing for him. A guy like that just wouldn't do very well around here. Well, he shot Herman. Hey, any one of us could have shot Herman. It don't take a college education to do that. He took another swig of his beer, then regarded Charlie. You feeling okay? You don't look so hot. Charlie rubbed his forehead with the back of his hand. Just working too hard, I guess. Well, quit worrying, Duck said. They went over to talk to Andy Schooler and Carl Infelt, who were doing the finishing work on the new doorway. As soon as Doug walked away, Charlie hurried into the storeroom in the back, past the floor-to-ceiling shelves and into the small washroom. He closed the door and locked it, then leaned over the toilet, his arms braced against the wall, afraid he might throw up. He gasped for breath, trying to calm himself, waiting for the trembling to stop. The hunter was leaving? The cops were dropping the whole case? So now things would go on as before. Now, he went to the mirror over the sink and unbuttoned his shirt. The sore red spot was not only still there, it was worse. The red rash had turned a dark brown, and there was an odor coming from it. He hurriedly pulled some paper towels from the dispenser, ran some cold water over them, and tried to dab the area clean. Some brown ooze came off on the towel, but the mark itself wouldn't go away. He held the wet towel there for a long moment, as if the cool water would relieve the fierce burning, but there was no relief. He began to shudder. Oh, please. I'm only trying to survive around here. I didn't mean it. Please. I swear I didn't mean it. So now we've got a little bit of a scare going on in the town. People are really getting freaked out. Like 2 murders and the possibility that they're related. And Steve Rather has gotten news that the sample was possibly a lizard. But the true question is, how is it possible that a lizard could have done the damage that was done to his brother? Tomorrow will be the reading of chapter 7. And, well, Steve becomes more than just a hunter. You'll just have to tune in and find out what's next. Anyway, I hope that you're enjoying this book. I have got several other books that I'm running to read after the Oath. I have got The Circle, which is a 4-part series. I have got, now that's from Ted Decker. I've got The Bride Collector from Ted Decker, which is a really interesting read. I have got several books from Frank Peretti. I have got The Illusionist. I have got This Present Darkness, and he it was actually his first, and there's a second one that he had written on that one, Piercing This Present Darkness. I have also got one from Terry Blackstock, but I've got many more novels that I am wanting to read, y'all. There's The Visitor from Frank Peretti, and Monster from Frank Peretti. And so, yeah, I've got some novels to be reading, you all. But once I get into the circle, that book is like this thick or so. That's going to be about a 2 or 3 month read, seeing that I'm only reading one chapter at a time. But it's a very good book, very good series. Plus, there are 2 other sequels to the sequels. Anyway, you all will just have to stay tuned and find out what and all I've got to read for you. Anyway, as I said, I hope that you all are enjoying this book read. And I know I'm not doing anything like how you would do if you would hear a book read. But hey, I'm being me. I'm trying to give different voices to the different characters, but I can only go so deep and so high. It's easier to kind of mimic a woman's voice, but not so easy to do a man. So I'm sorry for any of them sounding like a runoff, but I'm doing my best. Anyway, it's just getting the entire main idea of the story. That's the main thing. So anyway, tomorrow, the reading of chapter 7. So stay tuned and see what comes up next. I'm not sure if it's in chapter 7, but well, things are really starting to kind of look a little odd, a little bit more chancy, so to speak. Anyway, I will see yins tomorrow. I hope that yins have a great, awesome, blessed day.